Hello YouTube and welcome to Groundworks. Today I have a special treat for you. We are previewing the Kerbal Space Program 1.2 and today I will be focusing on mainly one specific aspect of it, which is CommNet, short for Communication Network. And in today's preview of the KSP 1.2 I want to focus on one specific feature, and that is Comnet, and how does it compare with the KSP well-known and well-beloved mod, RemoteTech. As you guys know, this RemoteTech is one of my favorite mods that I've been playing so far, and I have a detailed tutorial series on it, which I'll link into the description below. And I wanted to show you how does a new stock Comnet compare to that one. Here you can see us in the map screen, which is actually quite similar to the RemoteTech one, which I'll try to show in the window beside it so that you can actually compare the two. As you can see, both of them feature showing the signal path as they go along, and basically they do similar things, or basically they do the same thing. They expand the playability of the probes and limit their options in order for you to build communication networks, relay satellites, and basically if you're not piloting your craft, you need a signal back to Kerbal or to a control point, which I'll be getting into the more details below. But you need a signal back to Kerbal so that somebody could remotely steer your craft and perform experiments, etc., etc. Now, let's talk about, first let's get into the specific parts, because both mods add similar packs to the actual game. So I will try to show both of them if possible. Now, first, CommNet. As you can see, in the bottom row we have standard communication dishes from the KSP stock, and those are highlighted below. So we have Communitron 16, roughly, we have Comms DTS M1, we have the Communitron 88, okay, Communitron 8888. It takes a little bit for it to show. Yeah, Communitron 8888, and we have the Communitron HG55. Then the new components which are added here are HG5 high gain antenna. Then we have RA25 relay antennas, and these three antennas, by the way, relay antenna, RA50 relay antenna, and RA100 relay antenna. By the way, these three antennas are special relay antennas that I'll be elaborating a little bit further. And there's one tiny antenna, Communitron 16S, which is basically a same thing as Communitron 16, but it's fixed. Now, why do we have this one? Since in high G situations, when flying through the atmosphere, the antennas can snap pretty much in the same fashion as in RemoteTech. Basically, you need an antenna that you will be with which you can fly and still be able to maintain a connection, and that's why we have this one. Also, it introduces one more science canister to which the science experiments can be stored, and I'll go into more details on that later. So if you look at these, how do they compare to the RemoteTech antennas? So as this is displayed in pretty much similar fashion as it is with CommNet. So, and I have deliberately built it so that you can compare. Now, the bottom three are the stock. Communitron 16, Comms DTS, then we have the Communitron 8888, and we have the HG5, I believe. Yeah. Now, RemoteTech also adds the Reflectron DP10, which basically is the same thing as CommNet's stock Communitron 16S, and this is unbreakable antenna because RemoteTech also gives the ability of deployable antennas to be able to snap in atmosphere, and that affects all antennas that are basically extendable, that can open up, etc. So which antennas does the RemoteTech add? Communitron 32, which is omnidirectional, so you don't need to point it, but it's a stronger version of the Communitron 16. Then you have Reflectron KR7. Then you have KR14, ComTech 1, and the big kahuna Reflectron GX128. So, unlike the antennas in CommNet, these are not relay antennas per se. What does that mean? Let me show you. Okay, so what are the key differences, now that we have examined the parts, between the CommNet and the RemoteTech? So, first things first, both of them have antennas that are breakable in the atmosphere. When it comes to pointing antennas to the target, yes, in case of RemoteTech, you have to point, you have two types of antennas in RemoteTech, and that's omnidirectional, and you have targeting dishes. Now, the targeting dishes need to be pointing to a specific target. This target can be either an active craft or a Kerbal or planetary body, or it can be a specific relay satellite that you want to point. You just have to make sure when pointing to a target you have to have some antenna pointing back at your craft as well. Now, CommNet has a little bit different approach. You don't need to point antennas to a target, just the fact that you're in range is good enough. How does that impact the gameplay? You need way less antennas to do the same thing. For example, your relay satellite, if you're using dishes, in the case of RemoteTech, it would need to have one big directional antenna that would be pointing, for example, to Duna, another one to Joule, another one to the active craft, etc., etc., if you really want to build serious relay networks. However, in the CommNet, you just have to have one antenna that is like a big relay, and that one will automatically, based on where you are, turn itself and point itself. We assume it's just in the background processing that it's intelligent enough to point to wherever you want it to point. Now, when we talk about the specific control, also when it comes to flight computer, CommNet, as the RemoteTech Lite, does not have a flight computer on board. It has a little bit different GUI that I will be going through in just briefly. So it has no flight computer because also it has no signal delay. RemoteTech both has flight computer, which is very necessary if you're playing with RemoteTech, because you have signal delay. For example, if you have a craft around Duna, you might experience a 2 to 3 minutes delay, as I will show in the RemoteTech showcase. When it comes to the range of antennas, the antenna range in CommNet is calculated by the square root if the different antennas are used, meaning that although the range of your, let's say you have antenna of 10 million meters and 2 million meters, they will still be able to talk to each other at roughly 3 million or something like that, while in the RemoteTech you are limited by the shortest range antenna. So if you have an antenna that is basically 2 million meters, that's it, you're done. So that's also something to keep in mind. Then when it comes to stacking science in the probe cores, it's a new feature that has been added in 1.2. In the bigger probe cores, 1.25 and 2.5 meter cores, you can actually stack science. And that's something which was a big feature which we wanted for a long time, because you would figure out that these more advanced probe cores are intelligent enough to collect the science experiment from their respective containers, which I think it's awesome. Now, let's say, why do I consider CommNet like RemoteTech Lite? Let's examine some different situations. In the situation that you have no antenna, in the RemoteTech you are pretty much, if you have no antenna and you're on the launch pad, that means that all the probes have inbuilt antenna with up to the range of 2 kilometers. If you veer out of the range of these 2 kilometers, that's it, you're done. However, when it comes to the range of CommNet, you are with all probes you have a power of 5K. I don't know exactly what that means and how does it affect range, but that remains to be seen. In the situation where you have no electric charge, both CommNet and RemoteTech will exercise no control over your craft whatsoever. However, in the situation where you have no connection to a control point, or in the RemoteTech basically a communication like Kerbal or anything else, the difference between RemoteTech and CommNet is substantial. If you have no connection to a control point, in RemoteTech you're pretty much, well, bonkered, screwed, whatever. Because you cannot do anything except the procedures that you have invoked while you still had the connection and that are stored in the flight computer. However, with the CommNet, you can actually exercise partial control, and with that partial control, you cannot pitch, roll, yaw, and throttle, and you cannot add and edit maneuver nodes, but you can use zero throttle, full throttle, and staging, as well as part actions, event tweakable. So ultimately you can just pop up an antenna if you have it and reconnect and have once again. So with that respect, CommNet is much more forgiving than the RemoteTech. Now, let's say a situation where you have a connection to the control point, but not Kerbal. And in that case, you have both, in case of CommNet and RemoteTech, you have full control over the craft, of course, depending on the signal delay, of course, when it comes to RemoteTech, but and the full control of the craft when it comes to CommNet. However, in both cases, you cannot send science back, which makes sense. If you cannot send science back to Kerbal, you're pretty much cannot do anything. So when it comes to science, when you have a full connection to Kerbal, either direct or via relays. In both cases, you have full control over the craft. In CommNet, it's the real time, and in RemoteTech, it's via the flight computer and signal delay. And you can send science, and with the CommNet, you can even have some science boost depending on antennas, signal, and probes. And if you have and in case of requirements, what does exactly constitute a control point other than Kerbal? With the RemoteTech, you had specific set of requirements. You had a 2.5 probe core, and you had to have 6 Kerbals on boards and antennas to all the control points that you wanted to connect. In case of the CommNet, you only need to have 1.25 meter probe for a single hop relay, or 2.5 meter probe for infinite hops relay, so that you can actually have a control point. So, what does that exactly mean? So, let us go to the Space Center, and I'm going to show you what this specifically means from the perspective of, let's say, rover. Now, for the purposes of the demonstration, I have gotten a small rover on the surface of Dune. Granted, guys, I mean, given that this is that it's the first time that I'm playing here, and it's that the hyper-edit doesn't work, it took me a considerable amount of time to actually learn myself how to actually deploy this guy. But while I'm here, I'm also going to go via the interface. Now, this icon a little bit here shows that we have full probe control. This shows us that we have a good signal strength and that we are going via the COM relay, bounce signal through relay, that we are receiving data, and that we have direct connection with the KSC, meaning that we can fully control this little boy on the surface of Duna. Whoa, 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 don't fall, and oops, botched it. Anyway, you get the point. That means I have control, and the fact that you saw is I have control at real time. Now, with the RemoteTech, that is not the case. I don't have the control in real time. Switch to the rover, and in this case it's pretty much similar craft. However, there is one tiny caveat at it. I'm trying to push anything, but at the moment I cannot do anything because of the signal delay. It's 109 seconds, meaning I can do whatever I would like to do it, but basically nothing happens. And this is one of the downsides when you're playing with the RemoteTech. Basically, remote controlling rovers is pretty much impossible. So that's one of the downsides. However, I could toggle the action group, and as you can see now that I have disabled the brakes, this guy happily starts going willy-nilly. So I'm once again gonna toggle the brakes. If I would like to control this guy directly and be able to rove, I would either have to get the command seat and the Kerbal on top of it, or instead of and reduce this signal delay. If I want to reduce signal delay, I would need to put control center in the orbit around Duna, and I have done so in my Interplanetary Voyage series, to which I'll post the link in the episode below, and I'll post also the link to what are the command centers and how do they relate in the RemoteTech also in the video description below. But anyway, the point is you will need to get large probe core, 6 Kerbals, and appropriate antennas in the orbit around Duna for this signal delay to be basically maybe half a second and something. In that case, you could remote control this rover on the surface of Duna. And let us just quickly have this brakes process. Okay, so what do you really need to build a relay satellite with CommNet? As you can see, you need one small antenna that could basically talk back to Kerbal. You need to have probe core, you need to have batteries, electric charge, obviously, and you have to have the relay antenna. Remember, we said that those relay antennas are capable of relaying the signal from anywhere, pretty much, depending on its range, obviously. For example, this is a smaller antenna that can relay stuff from within Kerbal's sphere of influence back to Kerbal. So it's accepting the data and then it's relaying the data back to the KSC. It has full probe control, 100% control, and it's not being relayed. It has direct connection, it's receiving data, and it has direct connection to the Kerbal Space Center. So this is pretty much enough what you need to be able to relay the signal. Unlike the RemoteTech, which if you see on beside, you will be seeing that for the RemoteTech you need a lot more because you will need one antenna, and that pointed antenna towards the body. So this antenna will cover moon, minmus, active craft, whatever, because it automatically points itself to the right target, so we don't have to worry about pointing, which I think makes this mod a hell of a lot easier than RemoteTech. In the RemoteTech, as you can see, we have 3 communitrons, comms DTSs, and one of them is pointing to active vessel, meaning the probe that I'm currently controlling. One of them is pointing towards moon, and another one is pointing to the minmus. And as you can see, in the map view, if we compare the two, all of these are pointing correctly. And also in the RemoteTech, there is one more specific feature, which is called arc. So also besides the range of antenna, you have to pay attention on how wide its arc of coverage is. Because you could have a super high gain antenna that's only showing a tiny fraction of the moon itself. So for example, if you examine here what I'm showing here at Duna, you can see that the Kerbin's relays have wide enough arc of coverage to cover all of the antennas that we have around Duna. In the CommNet, this is much more simplified. Just stick on the relay antenna and you are good to go. So when it comes to our interplanetary relays, you can see if we switch to one of those, it's pretty much same old, except with a more powerful antenna. Sorry, it's a little bit not pointing at the sun. I want to point at the sun so that you see the antenna. Here you can see the antenna, and this is the relay antenna, a little bit bigger one that should be covering Duna and probably some other planets, Eve as well. I also have the Communitron here, a 16, which is basically using for connection if needed, and yeah, and that's it. Okay, so as you can see, this is roughly the equivalent of the relay satellite that we shown in CommNet. However, since this is not a dedicated relay antenna, it only needs to point it somewhere. So in this case, this antenna is pointing to the active vessel, meaning any probe that I'm currently controlling, this antenna will be pointing to it. Now, imagine a different scenario. Imagine that I have a rover which only has a small communication dish that's on the surface, small like omni antenna on the surface of the Mun, and that I have another relay similar to this in the moon's orbit. If this one is only pointing to the active vessel, my active vessel is the rover, and the rover has a small antenna and it doesn't have enough range to get in contact with this communication satellite. It does have the range to get into the range of the Mun's communication satellite, and even if the Mun's communication satellite has a different antenna that would be pointing to Kerbal, it still wouldn't be able to talk to this satellite because there is no other antenna pointing to the Moon. And actually there is here, but it's not active. So now, if we activate this one, that means now, from now on, the signal will be able to go from the rover, hit the relay satellite in the Mun's orbit, then hit this guy, and then get relayed back to the Kerbal KSC. So the main difference is because you have to point the antennas into different targets. That means you have to build a viable relay network. You have to have one antenna per planetary body plus one for the active vessel. So, looking from the perspective of the arcs of coverage, which I will enable now, these antennas are now covering Moon, and there is one or two that are pointing towards Minmus, as you can see by the arcs of coverage. So, what would be the equivalent scenario when we are controlling a rover on the surface of Duna? Let me just explain one thing for you in addition. Here you can see the signal delay for the RemoteTech. So if you press it, then you get a flight computer. And flight computer is very handy. I mean, maybe not in this case, but you can use it to differ your craft in different directions. So you don't need to control it directly. For example, I say I want orbit prograde, and now I just leave the controls away and let the craft point itself. Then let's say I want normal prograde. the craft will then position itself. Also, you can queue commands, and that more comes into play with the signal delay. But anyway, green means I have connection to the KSC, and D plus is how many seconds is time delay. Okay, so that's covering, I mean, how does CommNet stack with RemoteTech. There is one more cool feature that I wanted to show you. I mean, there are many of more, but this one I want to show you, and this is CommNet access. If you remember, this is a little bit like ScanSat. Each satellite has the capability to monitor the area underneath it, and we can actually set waypoints. Plotted waypoint Kerbal's divide on Kerbal. As you can see, hitting here, just recording for some specific data which we're currently over, we can actually put waypoints there, which I think it's awesome. I really love the mod. Also, different probes have different type of information. If you look at this one has body, Kerbal, altitude, target, etc. However, if we switch to a more advanced one, let's say this one, which has a bigger probe core, CommNet access, this has not only that it has colored display, but also it has the possibility to show biome. So as you can see, we can show same thing as we can show with a weaker core, but we can also show biomes, and here you can see some anomalies popping up, which is cool because when we are over it, we have a chance to actually put the waypoint and then basically go and see it. So yeah, with that thing in mind, I'd like to wrap up this this preview of the KSP 1.2. There are also numerous improvements and stability enhancements that were sorely lacking in the 1.1, but that I'll leave to my other fellow YouTubers to focus on, because I really wanted to show you the difference between these two. Once again, guys, thank you very much for watching. This is Groundforks signing off.